Ben Narasin. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, there you go. I have no presentation except my words. I sat in that chair for the last 45 minutes listening to Max, and my butt hurt. So stand up. Just get out of the chair for 1 second, because I'm going to ask you guys questions anyway. This, by the way, is a trick to keep your audience from looking at their phone, because you can't look at your phone while you're standing up. So how many people, just so I understand the audience, how many people here are entrepreneurs? Okay. Investors? Couple and corporate folk. All right, great. So have a seat. I'm going to talk about 3 things, and then I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions. Max had that awesome haiku. I don't have one. So all I can do is try to do a better job on the Q&A. So think of what you want to ask. You'll find that I am probably the least filtered person in Silicon Valley. I will answer any question you ask as long as I'm not breaching a fiduciary trust to one of my entrepreneurs. So I'm going to tell you 3 things. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, not just because I like to talk about myself, but because if you understand where I come from, then you'll understand whether you care about what I have to say. And I'll talk a little bit about the last 10 years in Silicon Valley and the evolution of how venture capital has changed over that time, because it's changed a lot, and then talk about what venture needs and wants and what sort of entrepreneurs should think about it. Because venture capital is a very valuable source of capital, but it's an appropriate source for certain types of businesses, and it's a small subset. And as somebody said to me earlier, it's not like you go to Silicon Valley and they literally throw money at you. Although, I will tell you one funny story. There's a guy who told me that he literally had VCs. There are a lot of people that do bicycling, competitive bicycling on the road, and he said he would have VCs trying to force him to take a check from bike to bike because he was so famous. That was Tony Fadell, who started Nest. He did so well at Apple that everybody wanted to give him money, and they literally would give him money not knowing what he was going to do. There is one reality in Silicon Valley that is true. If you've achieved enough, everybody wants a piece of your next thing. So that part I'll come back to in a little bit. So me, spent 25 years as an entrepreneur. I started my first business when I was 12. My father loaned me $50. I went to a comic book convention, bought a dealer's table, took my collection, came home with $1,500 in a paper bag. My dad became a big convert to my entrepreneurial future, and it's all I ever did thereafter. He reminds me that I never paid him back for that $50. I thought of it as equity. He thought of it as debt. It was a little different. So ran a bunch of businesses for 25 years all through high school and college. When I graduated from college, I started a menswear company making shirts like this that were much more interesting. And then in 1993, I discovered this wonderful thing called the web. The internet had been around, and I'd been using it. I grew up around computers because my father was from IBM, and I was, I would go in on the weekends with him and play with mainframes, hardcore geek. I always looked at technology as a weapon you could use in any business, and it still is that. If you're ahead of the curve on technology, technology is a weapon. If you're on curve, technology is perhaps keeping up, and after that, it's just an expense and you're behind. So being ahead is a valuable thing in the tech space. So in '93, when Berners-Lee came out with www, by the way, great credit to this region and things around it for that ever happening. Probably the single largest contribution to human history that I've seen in my lifetime is the fact that that was created as a free product compared to Netscape, which is a little bit different. That to me seemed like the biggest thing I would see in my lifetime, and I wanted a piece of it. So I started a web business. It's one of the first e-commerce companies in the world, took that company public. I started the business in '93, took it public in '99, had a successful outcome, moved west, and got to California about 14 years ago. And I started to see this big gap in the market for fundraising between angel investing and venture investing. Angel investing in the old days used to be groups that would get together once a quarter to listen to pitches from the stage from some kid that sent in a PowerPoint deck 3 months before, went through a process to get selected, to come in and talk about what they were doing. And when they were done talking, they'd say, okay, who's interested? And 5 or 6 people would raise their hands, and they'd go off in a room somewhere, and then they'd spend a month or 2 trying to decide if they'd give this poor kid any money, and then they'd give him 10 grand. And so he'd scrape together, or she'd scrape together, $100,000. Very inefficient and very small. Venture over here was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and this is still true today. If you look back in time, in the 90s, sort of pre-95, 96, something like 97% of all venture firms were $100 million or less. Today, a venture firm with $100 million or less is one guy hanging out at home making his meetings happen in a coffee shop. Or one gal. I can think of one gal who doesn't have an office, and she does all her meetings in coffee shops, and she has a team of 5 people. It's tiny, right? And so these venture firms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what happened because of that is as the venture firms got bigger, what do they then do? Well, they don't make more investments. Because a VC at a tier 1 firm will make 1 or 2 investments a year at the Series A level. That's it. Most people believe you can be on about 8 boards before you start to lose productivity. It is actually quite time-consuming to be on the board of a company. And some investors provide great value, some do not. Some are horrible, disastrous people that don't know what they're doing and try to tell entrepreneurs what they should do. But for the most part, there's a bunch of hardworking people, some of which are very smart, and they do tend to show up and help. So as these funds got bigger, the people couldn't do more deals, so instead they had to put more money into the deals. So you had small deals over here in angel, and you had really big deals over here in venture capital. And the middle was this missing space, which now is called seed investing. So 10 years ago, I started a fund inside of another fund to do seed investing. I funded about 80 companies, half of them raised Series A and beyond. I was very involved with most of those companies raising money. I've probably been involved in about 200 rounds. I point all that out because when I'm talking about the experiences and learnings I've had in Silicon Valley, it comes from 25 years as an entrepreneur looking through the lens of what VCs were doing, learning to become one. So I was a seed investor for 8 years, then I became a traditional general partner at a traditional venture capital firm. So I have a lot of views of what venture does well and what venture does poorly. And the goal, when I mentioned 50% of the companies I funded in seed went on to raise Series A, I would argue that is an exceptionally high conversion rate. In 10 years, I didn't do this analysis, but when I joined the fund I was with, they did the analysis and said, wow, you've only lost 6% of the money you've ever invested. And I was like, so? They said, well, it's normal to lose 40. So far, I haven't lost a lot. And that's important not because, oh, I'm so great, but because of the type of entrepreneurs I fund. But also this approach of that many companies converting. Well, so go back behind that. This starts now on the part of what venture wants, what venture needs. I see at least 1,000 companies a year. When I was a seed investor, I would fund 7 to 10 of them. Over the last 2 years when I've been a venture capitalist, I funded 1.5 per year. I thought when I started out as a VC that I would be able to take less meetings and see less companies, but I was wrong because I didn't find the companies I needed. And that is sort of to the heart of the reality of what happens in classic venture capital investing, and there's a reason for it. How many of you are familiar with how venture funds actually work? So I'm going to give you detail here. Venture funds are made up of people that go out and raise money from LPs, limited partners. Those LPs give them money so that they will invest that money so they can make a return. In exchange for that, they get 2 things. They get fee and they get carry. Fee, have you heard the term 2 and 20? So this is the classic venture capital model. If you raise, let's use $100 million just to keep the math easy. You raise a $100 million fund, you get 2% per year, $2 million, to run the fund. That pays you, the venture capitalists, and your whole team and your office space and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, it's a very good living. And the danger of that is it's a very corrosive thing. The more money you raise, the more fees you get. So there's this motivation to raise more and more and more. But the more you raise, the less effective you become. Because like I said, you can only do so many deals. But the other side, what makes venture really exciting for the people I respect, is carry, that 20%. And the real numbers are you get between 2 and 3% in fees and 20 and 30% in carry. That 20%, and this is critical, this is what it all boils down to. You get 20% of the profits your investments make after you've returned all the money to your LPs, right? So if I raise a $100 million fund and I invest it and I get $100 million back, I make nothing in carry. But if I get WhatsApp, which exited for $19 billion, I'm typically going to own 20% of it. That's $3.8 billion. I give back $100 million, and I get 20% of $3.8 billion. I'm a very happy person. I've created a lot of wealth. Isn't that great? But that metric is important to understand because VC's jobs, first of all, a VC's real job is to say no. I've met many, many people that start out in venture. I always want to know what they've learned. And after about a year, they say, hey, I figured out what my job is. Really? Yeah, my job's to say no. Because you take 1,000 meetings a year. It's not really 1,000 meetings. You take 200 meetings. You go to events like this. You see demo days. People stand on stage, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what you get paid for is what you do 99.7% of the time, which is say no, say no, say no, say no, until you find a deal that you cannot resist and you have to say yes. By the way, then you have to convince your partnership to do the deal, which on its own is a ridiculously difficult challenge. The bigger the partnership, the harder it becomes because your passion and energy has to be backed up by all those people around you. But let's go back to the numbers. So this $100 million fund, and by the way, remember I said nobody has a $100 million fund anymore? A great fund, many great funds have stayed small. Sequoia and Benchmark are probably tied for the 2 #1 funds in the world in terms of return, although they have very sharp knives. You know, you don't get it done. Here's one of the realities of venture capital. If you're a founder and you raise venture capital historically, 40% chance you will not survive as the CEO of that company. I love my friends. I like my friends at Sequoia, and I like at least 1 or 2 guys at Benchmark. But I'll tell you this, I bet the numbers are worse. You don't get it done, you're already dead. You know, I tell my entrepreneurs when they're raising money, Sequoia is awesome, and if they're the right firm for you, you should absolutely go there as long as you can handle stress, because the day they give you a check, they dug a grave in the backyard, and your job is to stay out of it. You get it done, or somebody else will. But think about that size. So they raise $400 million funds over and over and over again. Now, they do spin up other things. They do India and Asia and growth and all this stuff because everybody likes their fees, so why not, right? But they're very disciplined about keeping the fund at $400 million. So they've got to return the fund. So every partner wants the same thing. If I am going to matter in the world of venture capital over time, I need to be the one that returns the fund, because then everything changes for me, right? My LPs care about me more. My influence inside the firm's more important. I can help my entrepreneurs in ways that I couldn't before. $400 million fund. You can do the math. You're going to own, as a venture capitalist, 20% of a company. That means in order for you to do any investment, you have to believe it can return the fund, which in this case means you have to believe it can be a $2 billion outcome. Because $2 billion out is $400 million to your fund. And there's lots of great stories about this. I happen to pick on Sequoia a lot, but there's a great story about one of the partners going to one of his companies. This is a critical thing for people to understand about venture capital. It's only right for a certain type of business, and it's only right for a certain type of person. If your own desire is to build a business which you can sell for, say, $50 to $100 million, and you still own 80% of it because you only raised 1 seed round or whatever else, venture capital is absolutely positively not for you. Because the VC on the other side of the table wouldn't have done the deal if that's what he or she knew you wanted to do. And if you get that offer, there's a very good chance they're going to veto it, which they will have the right to do, because when you raise money from a venture capitalist, they have the right to veto a sale and oftentimes a future fundraiser. So a particularly extreme example of this was a partner I won't name. We'll just pretend I didn't name their firm, from a great firm, goes down to LA to see one of his entrepreneurs that's got an offer to sell for a lot of money. I don't remember what the number was, 600 million, 800 million. And he goes in and he sits down and he says, so we need to talk about this, but before we do, do you know how I got here? Yeah, Bob, you flew. His name isn't Bob. Yeah, you know how I flew? You flew on your G5. You brag about your G5 all the time. Great. You know, do you know how I got that G5? Excuse me, because I'm going to curse here. I didn't fucking sell too early. Then he got up and left. And that company did not sell for $600, $800 million. Kept going. And I know people that have then gone on to have multi-billion-dollar exits, and I know people who have gone on to get nothing. But the reality is you are, once you take venture capital, part of a portfolio. Every VC needs to know that everybody in their portfolio is trying for the same thing, the big, big, big win. Think of a portfolio like a military endeavor. I happen to have backed half a dozen Israeli companies that just happen to be great, but I've funded almost 100 companies, so it's not a disproportionately large size. But I think of my portfolio of entrepreneurs as the Israeli army, probably the best fighting force on the planet. But no matter how good a fighting force is, when they go to war, somebody is going to die. The individual soldier is not the issue. It's, do you take that hill? Do you win that battle? If you are going to take venture capital, you are an individual soldier. It is important to the venture capitalist that the group of you and entrepreneurs that you are not related to in any way, win the war they need, but it is not critical to them that you survive. And that is something I don't think people take to heart adequately, because most of the time I see entrepreneurs that want to raise venture capital that have good to great ideas, they would be better off not doing so. I'll give you an exact story. So there were 2 women that started a really interesting app that I met with years ago. I really liked the business. It was trending exceptionally well. And I said, you know, this is a great business. I like what you're doing. It doesn't seem big enough to me for venture capital. I think you should keep this one tight. I think you should just, you know, do what you can to raise money from whoever it is that won't sort of put you on that path. Friends and family, obviously, but angels as well. And I don't think you could raise venture even if you tried, but I'd be happy to help if I could. So about 2 months later, one of the women see each other at a trade show. She comes over, Ben, I got a term sheet from a VC. It's like, wow, that's surprising. Okay, good for you. I'm happy for you. Who is it? Oh, it's so-and-so. Like, wow, that's weird. I know so-and-so. He's a friend of mine. He worked at Microsoft. He retired. He hangs out. We work out together. He's not a VC. Oh, no, he's the newest partner at Firm X. By the way, here's a pro tip. If you shouldn't be able to raise venture capital, but you want to anyway, which you shouldn't, by the way, then you go to the new guy or the new gal. Because they haven't learned the painful mistakes they're going to make yet. And their partners do not want to crush their soul. So if they fall in love with you, even if their partners know that they are going to lose all their money because it's a disastrous mistake for them to invest in you, they will often let them do it anyway after it's clear they can't convince them not to. So they say to themselves, well, John Doerr has this quote that like training a VC is like training a fighter pilot that loses at least one plane. You got to lose $8 or $10 million to figure it all out. So yes, it works. I've seen it work multiple times. In none of those instances, by the way, did the company survive. None. Now, I'm not saying that it's never worked. I'm just saying of all the instances I've seen when the person found their way to the new person who did the deal they shouldn't have, they never made it. And do you really want to spend 3 or 4 of your years in the next while just to find out it's not going to make it? Like the nice thing about seed investing, by the way, is you get to figure it out fast and decide if you want to go forward. Anyway, so I said, okay, well, that's great. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. Awesome. Glad you got some money. And she said, well, what should I do? What else should I do? Think about this. I was like, well, I think you should sit down with them and understand what success means to this person. What do you mean by that? Well, what does he or she, in this case it's a he, so I'm going to stop. Anytime I say he, just assume I mean gender neutral. But I'm just too lazy to always do it that way. What does he need? Well, she didn't have that conversation, because if she did, what he would have said is, I need a material return. I need to return the fund. I need to matter. I need to get real money out of this. I need you to succeed at a level that's hundreds of millions of dollars for us. But instead, she got exactly what I told her she would get. She got an offer from a company about 18 months later to buy the company for $20 million, which is exactly what I thought she'd get. I'm not always right. It just happened to be I was right this time, and so I like the story. So she gets this offer to be bought for $20 million, and she probably owns half the company still. So that's material to her. And what does my friend say? NFW. It's like, what do you think we're in this for? We invested $8 million in you at probably a 20 post. Why would we want this flat exit? I mean, this is not useful. But he was worried. He actually told me later, we work out together, and I was asking, he said, yeah, she was scared. I could tell it wasn't going to go forward, so I only have 2 choices now. I let her do it, or I fire her and replace her. Fortunately, he didn't fire her, but he made it really hard on her. He said as follows, I will support you if and only if I get all my money out in cash first before everybody. There's no escrow, and there's no sign off on any sort of representations. I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in an M&A deal, but all those things are deal-killing requests. Everybody wants to escrow 10 to 20%. Everybody wants to know that nobody committed a fraud, and they want the investors to sign off. And he said, none of that. Cash, now, no contingencies. And so she went back to the buyer. Now, as a buyer, seeing this, what do you think happened? They didn't go away. That's the good news. But they did cut the offer in half. So instead of 20 million, she got 10. Now, if you remember, I already told you she raised 8 from this venture firm. When a venture firm invests in you, they have its preferred stock, which means that if you sell, they get their money first. So that 8 million comes off the top, even if you hadn't asked for it to. So then this poor woman has to go back to her seed investors, who probably gave her $1.5 million, and negotiate with them, which I actually don't feel that good about because they're the ones that took the most risk, to take a reduced payout so that she'll get something. Terrible, disastrous outcome. I mean, I can't think of a worse scenario. All these years put in, and in the end, she gets probably absolutely nothing except a job, which she quits later because she doesn't care. She's on some lockup. You always get locked up. You have these earnouts. Anyway, not a great scenario. Be really, really careful what you wish for. And so if you think about venture, the first thought you should have is, what do I need? What do I as an entrepreneur need to achieve in my life to be happy? And then solve for not having that taken away from you. If you are going to be happy with 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, $100 million outcomes, that is awesome for you. I'm not going to opine on that. I used to get all upset about those sort of things, and I realized what a jerky thing that was to do. I mean, I came from I didn't have money. I was, an entrepreneur with 2 sticks. I used all my own cash. Don't take venture capital, because venture capital doesn't want that exit. What you need to be able to show someone you can do is build something truly enormous. My friend Scott Sandell at NEA has a great quote that I love to steal, which is, we like to invest in enormous markets that don't exist yet. They're a $3.3 billion current fund. They manage over $25 billion. Now, you're not going to return their fund. I mean, although they've gotten pretty damn close to it on some deals, and they got close to it on deals where they helped entrepreneurs see why they shouldn't sell. I mean, I have seen this go really, really well. An entrepreneur that they had an opportunity to sell for $300 million, and their board member helped them see why that wasn't the best option and gave them founders liquidity, and then they ended up with what is currently about a $6 billion public company. Think about how awesome that is for the entrepreneur, by the way. Yes, they took a lot of risk, but forget about the material gain, because if you have 100 million in the bank or $1 billion in the bank, other than the fact you can be charitably really generous, I'm not sure if your life changes that much. I guess unless you want to collect something weird like jets or yachts. Like, what is the difference to you? Can you not spend the interest on $100 million? I mean, who can do that? That's just a stunning amount of money to get rid of. So, having said that, it's still material to that entrepreneur, because they now run a public company of material value and substance and are able to influence things in a way that they couldn't have done with their $100 million sitting on the sideline. It's a rare thing, but when you are pursuing it in your own mind first, then venture is an appropriate place to go. But you have to be a little bit crazy, a little bit arrogant, or just, have some vision of the world that you have to see come true. And this is, no person that has ever pitched venture capital more than once will ever say their opportunity is anything less than $1 billion opportunity. Well, it's at least $1 billion opportunity because of blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. Everybody that has ever invested in somebody that's going to go raise venture capital tells them, listen to the great podcast Reid Hoffman did with Airbnb, how they said, 30 million, that's not big enough. Put a B in front of it. Venture capitalists like to hear billions. You do have to pitch a certain sort of thing, but what's more important than that is what you believe your business needs to be for you. Because if you are going to be happy with $100 million out and the offer comes, you're going to want to take it, and it's going to get really ugly, and you're going to be really unhappy. So go back to some other ways, though, to think about funding. So I think seed is a really interesting space right now. Over the last 10 years, seed has developed quite significantly. Seed investing used to be about $1 million of capital for an entrepreneur with a great idea. It's now grown to anywhere from $1 million to $2 to $3 to $5. It's sort of crazy how big it's become. Sources of capital are changing. Traditional venture firms are still a big part of it, but now you've got seed investors growing bigger and bigger. You've got sovereign wealth funds coming in. You've got China and Russia and just all these massive sources of capital. You've got people doing SPVs, special purpose vehicles, where they can sort of add on to people's existing investments. It's just getting really crazy. So there is a sickening amount of money sloshing around. Seed investing is really useful because people come in and they say, look, so I said I need 5 things to make an investment. People, 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 a great idea, and a huge market if it works. But I only wanted entrepreneurs that I believed could raise venture capital when it did work, hence the 50% conversion rate. Seed investing allows you to prove a thesis. It doesn't allow you to build a business. You get to prove enough of a thesis to figure out whether this is a business that should raise venture or not. And that can be very useful to you and to the financial side of it. You only give up typically about 20% of your company in a seed round, or you should only give about, every round, by the way, should give up about 20%. If you want to think of a rule of thumb, I've seen things go much worse than that. They almost never go better. You do a round of seed, you probably give up 20%. You do the A, you probably give up 20%. You do the B, you give up 20%. And then thereafter, you can give up less if you're growing like crazy. But if you can do a seed round, then you can figure out whether the business is what you think it's going to be. Because we all have ideas of what life looks like for us, but we don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to look like. Once you put it out there in the live world, you get to figure out whether it is what you hoped it would be or not. And those metrics, and I'll make one last point, and then I want to open up for questions. Those metrics will help you determine whether this is a venture scale business. Venture, you probably heard the term the hockey stick, right? That everything grows like that. And now there's the J curve, where it actually costs a lot of money before it grows like that. So when I moved to Silicon Valley, I thought that everybody there was focused on investing in what is now called the knee of the curve, this place right here, right before that maybe. But they wanted smart people with great ideas. They don't. Venture capital firms are so big right now, what they want, for the most part, there are exceptions, and we can talk about them if you want. They want smart people with great ideas that are crushing it. Because they don't need to get a good deal. They need to get the right deal. Venture capitalists are like Ferrari collectors. They do not want to go into the Ferrari store and buy the Ferrari that's there that any old person can walk in with a lot of money and buy. It's not interesting to them. What they want is the one that comes up for auction once a decade and costs millions of dollars in perfect condition that will go up in value. They don't want a good deal. They want the deal. And they can pay what they need to pay. And so they wait till you're here. And this got exacerbated tremendously by Facebook. And for those of you, so this will be the closing point, that don't know that story, Excel doubled the bid and paid $52 million for Facebook. And Facebook is worth now a couple $100 million, I think. A couple $100 billion. So I saw somebody's inside numbers. It was in the first round of Facebook. They made 4,900 times their money. That is the dream of everybody in venture capital. Almost 5,000 times their money. They put in $25,000 and they made $49 million. I'm not talking about Excel. Excel did very, very well. That's what they need. That's what they want. And so what the message has become is, if it's Facebook, we can pay whatever we need to. But they were willing, again, to double the bid. That's like, this Ferrari's $1 million, I'll pay $2 million. Anybody else? No. Okay, you can have it. Move on, next person. That is what venture wants. They want to see things that are so exciting they cannot resist. Seed helps you get to that point, and hopefully the seed people you work with will be smart enough to figure out whether, if you get to the point you want to get to, anybody else will care. And you should probably have a tour guide and someone to help you get connected and on and on and on. But we got 10 minutes left. So with that, I will open it up to all the questions you've been thinking about, because you're going to give me lots of questions, right? Because then I'll actually feel I've achieved something.
What's to ask?
The throw around.
That VC is not the perfect source for funds for many entrepreneurs. So what do you think about this now trending and everybody's talking about ICOs? Is it just a hype? Is it a bubble? Is it the future?
It's great for whoever already did it. One of my entrepreneurs wanted to talk about raising a fund with ICOs and reached out to me a while back, and I'm like, yeah, it seems like it's a little late. In that, entrepreneurs will often, when you do a really, really early stage investing, sometimes it doesn't work out. And when it doesn't work out, they come to you and they say, what should we do now? Can you help me think about it? And the question always starts with, what's hot now? And my answer is the same as it will be for ICOs. That's the wrong question. Whatever's hot right now, too late for you. The most successful ICO I've seen, the guy's been working on it for 3 or 4 years. We were on stage together, and everybody wanted to ask about it. I do think there's interesting stuff. But one, the SEC is already saying it needs to be a registered security, so that screws a lot of stuff up. China shut it all down. The biggest issue I see with ICOs over time, hey, if you can make money that way and get it into your business and go run your business, more power to you. It just seems like a lot of people are in that pipeline. By the time you get through the system, it almost certainly will be too late. Maybe I'm wrong. The biggest issue I see is there are no market makers. So you're going to have a totally illiquid stock. It's like in the old days in New York, or used to have the NASDAQ, which had these pink sheets where they'd print out the really, really, really cheap stocks and send them to brokers once a day. Nobody's going to trade this stuff after the speculative bubble has gone, which means that whatever you did, now people are trapped in. It's like buying a bond and then trying to sell it again when nobody cares. So, there is a lot of hype. I think there's some really interesting things that will come out of it, but I think the death rate will be ridiculous in terms of just totally illiquid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Any other brave souls want the big blue cube?
Yeah, up here in the front. Hold on, Cyril, take another beautiful. Yeah.
So the second part of what he asked for is, what are those markets that don't exist yet that are $1 billion worth and that you are looking at right now?
So it's it was funny, for a long time people would come to me and say, what are you excited about now? And I was always, slightly bugged by that question, only because I never had an answer. The firm I was at used to say it was a thesis-based investing firm, and I was like, eh. So we finally came up with that I could address it. I'm like, I have a thesis. It's finding the next thesis. I have no idea. My job, the way I internalize what I do, is I meet as many entrepreneurs as I can looking for one that makes me say, wow. And then I get excited, because entrepreneurs will show me a vision of the future I didn't think of. There are some people that will sort of categorically say, I'm interested in, look, I like marketplaces, I like fintech, I like all kinds of stuff. But it's easier for me to say what I don't focus on, and that's sort of deep enterprise, hard tech stuff that bores me because I had to do it and I don't want to ever do it again. And probably medical device stuff, because there's just all kinds of things I don't want to have to learn about there. But the biggest markets are ones that haven't occurred to me. I'll give you some examples of things I've done recently, though. I invested in a company called Transfix, which is sort of Uber meets AWS for commercial trucking. Everything on the planet, except babies, as my founder likes to say, is delivered by truck. It is a staggeringly enormous business that has been untouched by technology. It's like that, what was that movie where people went back to the days of the dinosaurs, as if dinosaurs and people ever lived together, right? That untouched region. It's like that. It's stunning. So about 3 years ago, I funded them. Insurance tech has been interesting. I just funded, as I was mentioning to somebody in the audience earlier, an aqua farming business, which I almost didn't take that meeting. It was an entrepreneur I respected, made the referral, so I was like, okay. And by the way, if you're going to Silicon Valley, you want to raise money, always get the warm intro. No matter what you do, try to get the warm intro. The over-the-transom stuff never works. Even if it's just buttonholing people at conferences like this, that's better than just showing up over the, hey, I'm sending a LinkedIn in-mail. Like, making those things terrible. But entrepreneurs are thinking about the future all the time. Amazingly, though, as soon as you find one that's doing something amazing you'd never thought of, 2 others are doing it almost immediately. It's just this fascinating reality of how life works. I'm in some things in this. The auto space is somewhat interesting to me. I'm in aqua farming, but it's not like I'm looking at aqua farming. I like the way he's thinking about the business. I might do something else there, but I'm not now making a proactive effort to go out and find it. I did make a mistake, though, not doing that. I funded Lending Club, which was the first peer-to-peer lending company. Then I funded Cabbage, which was the first sort of business lending company. I funded Realty Mogul, which was real estate. And all along, I thought, it'd be great to have something like this for student loans. And someone pitched me, I thought they were going to pitch me Lending Club for student loans, and it wasn't. It was like a dashboard. And I was like, oh, why don't you do peer-to-peer lending for student loans? Oh, that would never work. Worked really well for SoFi, but I didn't go out and find them. So there are, sometimes it is smart to figure out there's something great that could be done and to go search it out and find it, but it's not the way I work. 1,000 times a year I look at something, and 1 or 2 times I say, wow, and that makes me happy.
Awesome. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? In the back? Yep.
You said you were an entrepreneur before. Now you're investing in companies. Are you not tempted to become an entrepreneur again, or to mingle too much into that business?
They're 2 different questions, tempted versus mingling. I'm often tempted. In fact, I had this one idea I've been saving for like 10 years, and when I started to get to know VCs, I picked one I really liked. I had him over to the house for wine, and I said, I have this idea. And I told him. He was like, okay. It's like, oh, it was a great idea. I was like, yeah, it was a great idea. Ideas are worthless. Execution is critical. Meddling too much, different question. I am very proactive in the amount of time and energy I give my entrepreneurs. Having said that, my goal is I've got 25 years of entrepreneurship behind me. I took a lot of arrows in the back. I would prefer my entrepreneurs not make the mistakes I made, and if I can show them a story that helps them see why it's a mistake, I will. It is not my job, nor is it any venture capitalist job that truly understands what they do, and by the way, a lot of them don't, to tell an entrepreneur what to do. Board members are not there to tell you what to do. Look, the only real control, a friend of mine, David Hornick at August Capital, said this once. He likes music. He said, I used to think on the board I was like a DJ, where I had one of those big boards, and I'm doing all this stuff, these sliders and these things. And he said, but then one day I looked behind the board and it wasn't plugged in. All I had was the power switch. The only thing a board member can really do is decide whether you keep being the CEO. And I don't think any board member that I respect, and even some of the ones I don't, want to have that nuclear event if they can avoid it any way possible. So my attitude is quite simply that you can only influence your entrepreneurs, and most of this comes from as a seed investor. My investments were very small in money, but my time was meaningful. And what I realized is I can only influence my entrepreneurs through the mutual respect and trust that is engendered. I would often say that I was a better parent to my entrepreneurs, and I do take a pretty paternal feeling about it, even though I don't feel like they're older than I am or younger, even though they are. I just want to be 23 for the rest of my life. I'm a better parent to my entrepreneurs than I am to my kids. Because I won't yell at my kids. Sorry, I won't yell at my entrepreneurs. I wish I didn't yell at my kids. I've stopped yelling at them. But, the protectiveness I feel both of my entrepreneurs in that way and my belief that if I cross that line, I will lose influence. I honestly believe if I just did the same thing with my kids, they're great, they're awesome, I love my kids, they're very well adjusted. except for one. Maybe I yelled at him too much. It's a balance, though. And I think great investors understand that in many ways they are stock pickers, and they are there to help, but it always has to be the entrepreneur's idea, or at least the entrepreneur's choice. And impregnating entrepreneurs with ideas is something we try very hard to do if we believe it's important to them. And the tricky part, we've only got 49 seconds left, so I'll give that.
We get another 10 minutes. This is actually.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So if anybody's in the market for building new timers, actually, that's a.
Oh, well, good to know. I was totally obsessed with being on time.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if you noticed, but Max, spot on 30 minutes, he stopped. It was like, wow.
Switzerland.
I know.
I tell you.
Am I getting a watch after this?
Yeah.
The relationship between an entrepreneur and their board member should be incredibly important to both parties. The party that has to worry about it the most, though, is the entrepreneur. Because when you take money from a venture capitalist, you are entering into a one-way prenup. They can divorce you, and you cannot divorce them. And that is true even at the seed round in some cases. There are a lot of different types of venture capitalists because there are a lot of different types of human beings. And they've had lots of different experiences. I was an entrepreneur, and everything I do is colored by my experience as an entrepreneur. There are a lot of people that are not entrepreneurs that are VCs. I didn't used to believe they could be any good. I've learned that they can be. In fact, they can be exceptional, maybe on a slightly lower conversion rate than the ones that used to be entrepreneurs. When you think about an investor, though, one of the things you should remember, I'm assuming that you now have truly got a venture scale opportunity ahead of you. You've got a 7 to 10 year journey, maybe longer, from here to big outcome or IPO, right? That journey is long and hard, and it's a lot harder than you think it's going to be. Now, if you've already been an entrepreneur for a couple of years, you already know how hard it is, right? It's ridiculously hard. Every single entrepreneur that I've ever come across, myself included, stares into the valley of death at some point. They walk right up to the edge of a cliff that will kill them without doubt, and they have nowhere else to go, and they stare down there into those jaws of all the ravaging dogs of life that are going to try to rip them apart, and they say, how am I going to get across it? By the way, the losers give up and walk away, and you should never fund them, and you should never be one of them, because if that's who you are, if you're not willing to suffer ridiculous amounts of pain, this is the wrong journey for you. But that memory, I remembered, we were about to miss payroll. I had a startup, the one that went public. I put everything I had into it, and we were right here. I was out of cash, $200,000 in debt and a credit card, and payroll was 2 days away, and we were out of money. And I had one chance of getting that money from one party. And I went into that meeting knowing if I didn't come out with that money, we had to shut the company down. The difference between me being down there dead and not was that meeting and my desire and passion and energy and luck. By the way, it all takes luck. No matter how good you are, how smart you are, how great your idea is, if you do not have some luck along the way, you are screwed. Luck is the combination of timing and opportunity. Timing could be called luck. It's the harder you work, the luckier you get. But sometimes it just doesn't matter. You've got to be lucky. We get to be lucky. Venture capitalists have to remember that luck matters to them too. Do you think, so MySpace, Friendster, Facebook. You think the VCs that invested in Friendster made a mistake? Who here even remembers Friendster, by the way? Anybody? Okay, for those of you who don't know it, it was just like Facebook long before Facebook, and the growth was ridiculous, and it was the hottest deal around. And it's just as bankrupt today. It never got there. But at the time, anybody that won that deal was an absolute stud, because that was, and it was Kleiner and Benchmark. Top people. But whether it was timing or technical flaws or God knows, but there's some great, if you want to see how close someone can come, there's a great podcast on it. Here's somebody that came that close to what's now worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and instead he's trying his third business. It's a tough one. So being of aid is important for me. It's important for some. But remember, whoever you pick, for 10 years, you should assume you're sitting across the table from them in a board meeting. And remember also that stat I gave you that 40% of entrepreneurs that raise venture capital do not survive as the CEO? Well, I took my company public. There was a board of us of 4. Me, somebody I trusted, and 2 people that wanted to run my company, who were 30 years older than me that didn't know dick, in my opinion. This is not going anywhere live, is it? I hope. I'm good.
Hi, folks at home.
Yeah, sorry about that. If I did not have control of that company, I would absolutely, positively have been fired. And that company also would have been bankrupt because they were wrong. But instead, we had a really great outcome. We had it only because I never raised venture capital. So I had control of my business, and they couldn't fire me. Therefore, they couldn't be wrong. But it was a miserable, acrimonious time in my life. I have never had meetings that were so draining. In fact, I learned the word acrimonious in a board meeting when the guy I trusted said, I just wish these meetings could be less acrimonious. And I was like, I don't know what that word means. Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's where we are. So I'm very passionate about finding my entrepreneurs the right investors. I'm a firm believer that you want the right people across the table because, as I was about to finish, if you get moved out, you're not going to be happy. I mean, you hopefully will at least get promoted to chairman or moved over to chief visionary or CTO or something. But if you get fired, you are never going to be happy about that. The difference in my mind, though, is if you get fired by somebody that you believe did it because they felt they were doing what was right for the company, it was the right thing for the organization, and they were doing it with integrity, and you trust and respect them, you will get over it. And if you don't believe those things, you will be bitter till the day you die. The co-founder of Cisco is a woman who the first time I came across her was out of Cisco for like 6 or 8 years with $200 million, and the visceral anger of her being fired was still obvious. I think when she dies, it'll be on her tombstone. I got kicked out of my company, right? So that balance, that relationship is super important. And lastly, I did say I was finishing that point, but sometimes one person can make a tremendous difference. Sometimes they can show you that thing you didn't quite notice. Maybe that thing isn't a little hill of ice. Maybe it is an iceberg. Maybe it's something else. Maybe I've hit it. You know, if I hit an iceberg, why do you need to hit an iceberg? Anybody else?
Perfect. Yeah, we have time for a couple more questions. Yep, in the middle there. We'll throw it to the middle. Yep, there we go.
There are more and more companies that try to combine technology with doing good. Have you had experiences with impact investing, and do you think that it has to be treated differently, or do you see any challenges there?
Generally, I think it's best treated differently. I have had a couple of companies I've been fortunate enough to invest in that I thought would do well and do good. They haven't worked out. So maybe that's not where I'm getting my luck. The challenge is you're sort of, fish or fowl. If you've got too many, the biggest weakness of most entrepreneurs that we all, myself included, all have to learn is the power and strength of focus. And so it's sometimes very difficult to have competing agendas. Now, there are some great firms. As an example, Bill Draper, the original Draper, who was a very successful venture capitalist, has started a fund which is exclusively built to invest in truly charitable efforts, but treat it like a venture capitalist would in terms of making sure to help and try to build the right team. I love nothing more than when a business I see has positive social good that it can achieve as well, but I do believe it is a weakness for me to let that influence me. Because ultimately I want to believe that I will do well eventually through my ability to deploy additional capital into the world. I think Bill Gates is probably doing tremendous things. I think a lot of people that have the ability to be philanthropic are doing tremendous things. Here's a great example. So Warren Buffett, for the first time ever, took part in an interview for a movie about himself. It's on Netflix now. It's worth watching. He was famously never philanthropic, never gave money away, just really tight ass about it. His wife, however, was very philanthropic. And he said once, the best thing I can do for any philanthropic effort is to keep investing money because I'm so damn good at it. He didn't say it that way. But he's done so well. Wouldn't it be better to grow and grow and grow? Now, unfortunately, his wife died, and he has become apparently much more philanthropic, maybe as a legacy for her. But it's a great thing if you can get it, but you first got to decide the business makes sense. And there are great businesses that have gone on to do, so Salesforce, tremendous, like #1 growth company over the last 5-10 years, doing tremendously well financially, and it has this mantra of give 1%, like 1% of profits, 1% of time, 1% of stock to charitable good, right? There's an organization in Silicon Valley that does some great stuff where they go to entrepreneurs early and they say, hey, contribute some of your founding stock now when it's effectively worthless into this charitable trust so that if it becomes worth a lot, you can deploy it all tax-free and all this great stuff. So there's some things you can do. I used to encourage entrepreneurs to try to spend time there. I would love to see it done. It can be. And the last point is, if you're pitching a business that's about a social good, the biggest challenge is, will the venture capitalists believe you have Are you there to save the world, or are you there to do something else? Now, every entrepreneur has a passion about changing the world. It is almost humorous. If you watch the show Silicon Valley on HBO, it makes me laugh every time because it's also true. But it's like, we're going to change the world and make it a better place by redefining the enterprise stack for cloud computing software layers using Kubernetes. And it's like, yeah, who cares about that? But there are plenty of businesses that bake in all kinds of things. But another point, by the way, I'm not going to try to defend the fact that I focus on businesses that can be really big businesses. I do think it's a social good to create enormous amounts of employment. Now, some technologies are a risk to employment, but you've got a company, I had a company, I remember that it got to almost 500 people over 4 years, and it was sort of cool. Like, wow, that's pretty neat that the 2 people I funded created 398 extra jobs that are paying well and that the people are enjoying. So there's a long answer. It should have just been, it's great if it's truly about a social good for people that are double and triple bottom line, and those things are taken off like crazy, and the foundations want to do it. There's lots and lots of sources of capital. But in order for you to get venture capital for a social good business, the business itself has to be ridiculously great in the first place, and then the social good is a bonus. There was somebody behind you, I think.
Thank you.
You've been talking a lot about venture capital, but not so much about seed money. Also, you were saying to entrepreneurs, you rather recommend going for the seed money stage and not necessarily going up to the venture capital stage. So where do you see the difference between a seed investor versus an venture capital investor, except of the money invested?
So it varies tremendously. In fact, I wrote a story for TechCrunch that should run pretty soon about the coming war in venture capital. The top seed investors are now bidding directly for Series A's. They're doing 2 things. They're not releasing their own companies that should be graduating up to Series A to the world. They're just doing it themselves. And then they're bidding against venture capital firms for Series A. So there is a real blurring of the lines. Having said that, there's lots of different types of seed investors. Seed isn't an alternative to venture so much. I view it as the money that allows you to figure out the type of business you should build. Meaning you're going to travel down this path and you're going to come to a road one day. I think of it as the happy moment in the bar where you and your co-founder or friend are sitting there and you're drinking or whatever you're doing, and you say, yeah, I see where this can go. I really get it now. Now that we've released the product and we've got 1 million app users or blah, 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 I can see the path. I know what this could look like. And it looks like, I'm going to only use the financial terms for a second, even though that, not because it's all about money, but just to get overly simple. I see this being a great thing for Condé Nast to buy for $50 million. Okay, never raise venture. Or I see this being the next Facebook. Well, yeah, go raise venture. The seed money just allows you to prove enough to figure that out. And within seed, there are a lot of different types of investors because you've got these other changes where, AngelList has done some interesting things in seed. A lot of people have created syndicates. There's a new book out called Angel. The guy that wrote it, Jason Calacanis, has built a really big syndicate of investors. And so those people have different tolerances for what an outcome might look like. I'll give you an example of why this is important. I seeded a company a while back. And when I was running my seed practice, I didn't make people have board meetings, but I had faux board meetings where they'd have the discipline without the responsibility, meaning I wasn't going to vote. I was just going to get them ready for their A. And they asked if I could invite 2 other people that were investors. One I knew and I had no problem with. The other was this sort of typical angel. And I was like, I don't know. I just feel like there's going to be a conflict. And they said it would really, really be useful to us. Fine. Entrepreneur always wins, by the way. They always have to win. I mean, unless they're literally over here at the Valley of Death and they're diving in like, I'm going to jump. Maybe then you try to pull them back. And so he came to the meeting and we were talking and the entrepreneur said, I'm going to go see Google and it's going to be a great meeting. And the guy said, yeah, and maybe they'll offer you $15, $20, $30 million and we can sell. And I was like, no, we can't. Like, what do you mean? You put in money at $3 million, you'd make 10x. Like, yeah, that's not what I'm in this for. By the way, that's something else you should understand that I didn't talk about. It ain't about 10x at all. I'll keep answering your question in a second, but this is something I should have said. I'll go back to Sequoia because they're fun to poke at because they're so damn good. I was in the office of one of their partners long ago, and he was sitting there, and I'm going to do his facial movements because they were so weird because we were all alone. And we're talking about venture capital, and he's like, Ben, you know how these people in Silicon Valley brag about their 10x's? You know how some of them brag about their 100x's? And remember, he's in a room by himself. It's just me, and I don't know what he's looking for. Anyway, he's like, we don't give a shit about those. We want 1,000x. We've had 4 of them. And I remember thinking, yeah, great, where's yours? So behind him was a whiteboard with all his investments written out. You know what the top one was? Now remember, this was 8 years ago. LinkedIn. Pretty sure they made 1,000x on that first round investment. So it is really about shooting for something much more significant. The size of firm will change that. That is relevant to your question because different seed investors think different ways. For me as a seed investor, if I believe you will sell for $50 to $200 million, I will not invest in your company. Because my job was always and still is, and it's the discipline I want, is to find people at that early stage, people, great idea, huge market if it works, that I believe can go on and go the journey all the way if everything works out and they get lucky and they work hard. So you've got to also be really careful at the seed level, and seed is incrementally different than angel, in that it's more institutionalized and they have funds and everything else. But you need to find out what they need and what they want. And I do believe, whether it's seed or venture or anybody, if you are taking money from people that have a different goal than what you believe in your heart of hearts is what you need to achieve, you are setting yourself for an enormous amount of pain. And I've been in meetings. I was with one of the people I mentioned a minute ago. He was having these entrepreneurs pitch us, and one of them pitched this thing, and he said, well, you got to tell them it's $1 billion outcome. Without that, they're not going to do anything. And I was like, and he's looking at me, he's like, you don't agree, do you? I was like, I don't care what size the outcome is. I do for me, but I care that you tell me what you need the outcome to be. Because yeah, you're going to get a no from me if you tell me it's going to be $200 million, but think about how much worse it is otherwise. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots of layers of seed. There's so many people. I mean, you Google seed investing and there's got to be 1,000 funds at this point. I heard that 251 individuals are out there trying to raise seed funds right now. It's crazy. Here's the quick numbers, 19,000 companies seeded a year. There's 1,900 venture rounds done. Now, that doesn't mean there's a 10% conversion rate because venture rounds includes follow-on rounds, the B that happened after the A, the C that happened after the B. So you should figure 5% of companies that get seeded actually go on to raise venture capital at best. But it's a very vibrant ecosystem, and I will point out that historically, it has been the desire level for types of outcomes is different outside of, not just outside the US. California, Silicon Valley, is its own distinct Shangri-La. It draws the most talented people from all around the world. Doesn't mean there aren't great communities here and everywhere else. But just like Florence during the Renaissance, the concentration of substance and quality of a certain art form, the art form of entrepreneurship, is so strong that it draws like a ridiculous magnet. I've met people from every corner of the planet. It's amazing who ends up there. I funded a Polish PhD who had 23 people working for the last 4 years in Warsaw who moved to Silicon Valley because he knew that this was the right opportunity, he wanted to fund it. So anyway, but I do find that outside of Silicon Valley, expectations are different. Valuations are different, they're lower. Outcomes have to be different, therefore they're lower than the big outcomes that we must have. European history has always shown that sort of the round size will be smaller, but the outcomes can also be smaller. So there's, figuring out what community you're going to raise in is also super important.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for. I already went a bit over, but I really liked the discussion a lot. So thank you very much, guys. A big round of applause. Thank you. And then hold on. For the flight back, awesome. A pair of headphones and a carry-on size compatible bag.
Awesome. I'll stay around for lunch if anybody missed out on the chance to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Random rant. Thank you.
Another round of applause, folks.